At the height of Tokyo's push for modern safety, a fireproof warehouse was built that engineers swore could never burn, with sealed rooms, reinforced concrete, and inventory kept under lock and key. Yet, in 1936, it exploded from within, igniting a fire hotter than anything investigators could explain. Records vanished. Blueprints do not agree. Rumors still swirl about hidden government stockpiles and secretive modifications. How does a building designed never to ignite become ground zero for an event the National Archives can barely acknowledge? The answer begins with a paradox that Japan has not solved. In the early decades of the 20th century, Tokyo's planners and engineers faced a relentless threat: fire. For centuries, the city's dense neighborhoods and wooden warehouses had been vulnerable to devastating blazes. The Kuramae fireproof warehouse entered the scene as a bold answer to this problem. Its construction was a showcase of the era's technological ambition, a structure built not of timber or clay, but of reinforced concrete, a material then celebrated in engineering journals and promotional leaflets as the future of urban safety. The warehouse's walls were thick, poured concrete with steel rebar woven through the core. Floors and ceilings were layered, each slab designed to halt the spread of heat or flame. Storage rooms were sealed tight, with heavy fire-resistant doors that locked in both valuables and, it was claimed, any threat of combustion. Windows were small, set high and fitted with iron grills. Even the roof was poured concrete, sloped to shed rain but built to withstand the heat of a citywide inferno. Designers minimized every trace of wood, a sharp departure from the traditional Kura storehouses that lined the Sumida River for generations. Municipal advertisements boasted of the building's resilience, calling it a model for the new age. Fire resistance was not just a technical feature but a selling point, featured in city planning exhibitions and cited in local periodicals as a sign of Tokyo's modernization. The warehouse became a symbol of confidence, a place where merchants, officials, and insurers could trust that their goods would survive whatever disaster the city might face next. Inside, each storage chamber was isolated by thick walls and double-sealed doors, creating a network of compartments meant to contain even the most stubborn flame. The building's ventilation was carefully controlled, with ducts designed to prevent the spread of smoke or heat between rooms. Everything about the warehouse suggested a fortress, an engineered promise that what lay inside would be protected from the city's oldest enemy. In an era eager to prove the power of science over nature, the Kuramae fireproof warehouse stood as a monument to progress, its very existence a quiet assurance that the age of catastrophic urban fires was coming to an end. Behind the reassuring walls of the Kuramae warehouse, questions gathered like dust in the corners. Officially, the building stored tax, seized goods, imported materials, and government property, but the true inventory was never made public. By the mid-1930s, entire stretches of the warehouse ledger vanished from city records. Surviving city council minutes from July 1934 reference seized but undisclosed warehouse property, and clerks later recalled shipments catalogued only by code, with orders to rewrite inventories or withdraw them entirely. These accounts, preserved in unpublished memoirs such as Kuramae Zaihon Nikki, suggest a level of secrecy that went far beyond routine bureaucracy. Rumors took root in the absence of facts. Some whispered about experimental chemicals, volatile industrial compounds, or military-grade textiles. Others pointed to government-managed inventories never listed or explained. Local newspapers hinted at sensitive materials, but no official ever confirmed what, if anything, was being hidden. The gaps in the record coincided with a period of tightening state secrecy as Japan's political climate shifted. Historians have long speculated that this opacity was deliberate, a way to mask the movement of materials as military priorities grew. Confusion extended to the building itself. Surviving blueprints scattered across municipal archives contradict one another. Some show extra-sealed chambers tucked behind reinforced walls, others omit these rooms entirely. Overlay sheets from the late 1920s and early 1930s bear scratched-out notations that read, "No ignition, no oxygen exposure, integrity priority," but the meaning remains unclear. The chief municipal engineer Masaru Tanga signed off on the original plans in 1932, but subsequent revisions by Shigeru Hashimoto in 1933 were ordered at the city level and may have reflected emergency modifications. Family archives for both men remained closed to researchers, leaving only hints in correspondence that something unusual was underway. For those working inside, the sense of uncertainty was constant. Clerks described shipments arriving under cover of night, with instructions to store them in rooms few had access to. The combination of missing ledgers, inconsistent blueprints, and secretive handling of cargo created an atmosphere where suspicion flourished. As the building's reputation shifted from pride to unease, the stage was set for an incident that would defy both engineering and explanation. Vendors along the Sumida River paused mid-transaction when a flash brighter than sunlight cut across the district. It lasted less than a second, and a tea merchant described it as a white blade, not fire, not lightning, just light. The next moment, an unearthly sound rolled out, a deep, muffled thump that seemed to pull the air inward. A boatman interviewed by the Asahi Shimbun on March 7, 1935, recalled, "It was not an explosion. It was like the river itself inhaled. Then the glass rained down from inside the warehouse." Eyewitnesses agreed on the unnatural sequence. First the white flash, then the implosive roar. Children in a nearby alley ran for cover, thinking an earthquake had struck. Shopkeepers ducked behind counters as doors and windows on the river facing wall caved in, not out. The Tokyo Daily published a survivor's account. The building seemed to lift, just a little, and then collapse on itself. There was no orange flame, only white and grey. The initial reports from local papers fixated on the colour and quality of the light. No one saw the familiar orange or red of a fuel fire. Instead, witnesses described a brightness that seared after images onto their vision. The sound too defied expectation. Rather than the sharp crack of a chemical blast, it was a low, drawn-out groan, as if the warehouse itself was being crushed from within. Vendors scrambled to gather their goods as dust and fine debris billowed out over the river. The air filled with a mineral tang, sharp and metallic. By the time the first firefighters arrived, the sealed doors had already buckled inward, and the stonework around the windows was fractured inward. Those who had seen the flash and heard the implosion struggled to explain it to city officials. Their testimonies, preserved in fragments by the Asahi and the Tokyo Daily, would become the first puzzle pieces in an event that seemed to reject every familiar pattern of disaster. Maps from the 1930s show the Kuramae warehouse pressed between the Sumida River and a narrow city street, its long facade facing the water. On the day of the explosion, witnesses along the riverbank described the windows and doors on that side shattering inward, not outward. Glass and iron grills crashed to the floor as if sucked by a sudden vacuum. The street-facing wall, in contrast, showed little immediate damage, an anomaly for any conventional blast. Eyewitness sketches collected by local police capture the sequence, a white flash inside the building, followed by a deep, concussive sound. Then, for a split second, the entire upper structure appeared to lift off its foundations. Some bystanders insisted the roof rose visibly before crashing back down, an effect that left even veteran firefighters at a loss. The initial force seemed to come from within, pushing against the reinforced concrete, yet the main rupture pulled the building's shell inward toward the river. Overlaying these accounts with surviving street maps, the pattern becomes clearer. The greatest structural failure occurred along the river wall, where doors and windows caved in as if under negative pressure. The building's central corridor, documented in several city planning sketches, ran perpendicular to the river, with sealed storage rooms branching off. These rooms, according to notations in surviving blueprints, were designed for maximum containment, with double thick doors and no direct ventilation. The implosion effect left debris scattered inside the river facing chambers, while the street side remained eerily intact. Fire inspectors, referencing their own hand-drawn diagrams, noted that certain slabs had shifted vertically, as if briefly lifted by an upward surge. No typical fire or explosion pattern matched this combination of inward collapse and momentary lift. The pressure wave, mapped by the placement of debris and the direction of fractured concrete, suggested a mechanical event that defied both the building's design and the expectations of every expert who examined the scene. Fire safety engineers arrived at Kuramae within minutes of the collapse, expecting a routine assessment of a failed structure. What they found instead challenged the very definition of fireproof. The incident book from the Tokyo Fire Department, preserved in fragments, records internal temperatures surpassing 1,300 degrees Celsius inside the sealed chambers, well above the combustion point of anything officially stored there. For comparison, a typical warehouse fire in that era rarely exceeded 400 degrees. Structural engineers tasked with analysing the aftermath documented patterns of breakage that made little sense. Concrete slabs were fractured along internal seams, but the cracks radiated outward from the centre of the rooms, not inward from the walls as would be expected in a conventional fire. Some fragments, examined decades later under a microscope, revealed microfissures consistent with sudden, violent overpressure, more like the signature left by a contained detonation than by slow, heat-driven expansion. No traces of explosives were found in the debris. Firefighters noted the absence of chemical residue or accelerants, and the inventory logs that survived listed only textiles, paper, and seized goods. Yet the heat was intense enough to melt iron grills and buckle steel doors. Years later, in a technical journal, a fire safety engineer described the event as a thermal spike without precedent in a sealed environment. The physical evidence pointed to a stark contradiction. A fireproof warehouse engineered to withstand disaster had been undone by forces no one could account for. The need for a broader investigation became impossible to ignore. Official records for the Kuramae warehouse disaster have all but vanished. The Tokyo Municipal Archive holds only a set of index cards, each stamped missing where 4 investigation volumes should be. No comprehensive report survives, and even the summary filed by city authorities lists the incident as an accidental fire, undetectable source, with no mention of the warehouse's unique construction or the implosion effect described by witnesses. Newspaper clippings from the week after the fire tell a different story, hinting at unknown chemicals and questioning the rapid clearing of rubble. Within 36 hours, every trace of the building's foundation had been removed. Hauling invoices from Kobayashi Transport, the private firm contracted for cleanup, end abruptly after a single delivery to an unlisted dump site, one that does not appear in any municipal landfill records from 1935. An archival historian who has spent years tracing the paper trail describes the investigation as a textbook case of bureaucratic disappearance. Municipal index cards reference missing volumes, but no accession logs or withdrawal slips explain their loss. The historian points to a pattern. When files go missing in Tokyo's municipal system, they are usually marked with a transfer or destruction note. In the case of Kuramae, only the word missing appears, with no date or reason. Photographic evidence is just as scarce. 3 grainy images remain, all published in the Asahi and Mainichi newspapers. Diaries from Ishikawa Shoji, a staff photographer, mention negatives requisitioned by authorities and never returned. No receipts, no official requests, just a gap where documentation should be. The absence of records, investigative, photographic, administrative, stands in sharp contrast to the thorough documentation of other Tokyo disasters. The administrative void left behind at Kuramae is as striking as the physical destruction itself. In 1934, a new set of secrecy statutes swept through Tokyo municipal government. These laws, drafted under pressure from the Home Ministry and military advisors, sharply limited public access to information about infrastructure and industrial storage sites. Budget ledgers from the same period reveal a sudden spike in emergency security spending, with allocations marked for temporary cordons and confidential logistics. The Kuramae warehouse stood less than 1 kilometre from the Army Medical Store and the Tokyo 5th Depot, both mapped in city planning documents from November 1934. Military logistics historian Dr. Sato notes that this proximity was no accident. Warehouses in these zones were routinely swept into military supply networks, their inventories managed under dual civilian and military oversight. As state secrecy intensified, municipal records for sensitive sites like Kuramae began to vanish from public ledgers. The Defense Garrison budget for March 1935 includes a new itemized line for unexpected expenditure, temporary security cordon, matching the date of the warehouse explosion. These measures, designed to protect military assets and obscure vulnerabilities, created a climate where accidental fires or unexplained losses could be quietly absorbed into the machinery of state secrecy. The resulting gaps in documentation are not simply oversights, they are artifacts of a system built to conceal as much as it revealed. Engineers and historians have spent decades circling the same set of unanswered questions. The first theory centers on chemical mishandling. An anonymous letter preserved in the Disaster Study Group archives describes a shipment of experimental cellulose nitrates arriving at Kuramae just weeks before the fire. No inventory log confirms this, but the temperature spike inside the sealed chamber, 1,300 degrees Celsius, mirrors the kind of rapid combustion seen in confirmed nitrate disasters in Osaka and Hamburg. Yet, when fire safety engineers ran their own simulations, even the most aggressive models using textiles and dust failed to reach those temperatures. The resonance theory, proposed by a municipal engineer in 1935, suggested that vibrations in the sealed chamber could have triggered a pressure collapse, igniting fine fibers. But the heat output in those models always fell short. In recent years, a contemporary modeler at the University of Tokyo has revisited the case using advanced computational fluid dynamics. His results, published in 2019, show that without a significant quantity of high-energy material, something never officially listed, the observed implosion and white flash remain unexplained. Each hypothesis, tested and retested, stops at the same wall. The numbers do not add up. The mystery at Kuramae endures, not for lack of theories, but because the evidence refuses to settle on any one cause. Today, entire chapters of Japan's industrial history remain sealed behind missing records and silent walls. As urban development accelerates and new materials enter our cities, the cost of buried truths grows. The unanswered questions at Kuramae are not just architectural, they are a warning. When evidence vanishes, so does public trust. Some mysteries aren't lost to time, they are hidden by design. What would you demand to know if it happened now?